The desert wind carried the scent of dust and diesel fuel across the forward operating base as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell adjusted her rifle scope for the third time that morning. The sun was barely visible through the haze, casting long shadows across the compound where American forces had been stationed for the past 8 months. Sarah had arrived at FOB Damascus 3 weeks earlier, assigned to a joint operations unit that was supposed to be a routine intelligence gathering mission. What she didn't know was that this morning would test everything she had learned during her years of training. Sarah had grown up in Montana, where her father taught her to shoot when she was just 8 years old. By the time she was 16, she could hit a target at 600 yards with her eyes closed, or so it seemed to everyone who watched her practice. Her natural talent with firearms was undeniable, but it was her calm demeanor under pressure that truly set her apart. When she enlisted in the Army at 18, her recruiters immediately recognized her potential and fast-tracked her through specialized training programs. The base was unusually quiet that morning, with most personnel still asleep in their bunks. Sarah preferred the early hours when she could think clearly without the constant noise of helicopters, vehicles, and radio chatter that filled the rest of the day. She was reviewing intelligence reports in the briefing tent when Sergeant Major Rodriguez approached her with a grim expression that immediately put her on alert. "Mitchell, we've got a situation developing about 12 clicks northeast of here," Rodriguez said, spreading a tactical map across the metal table between them. "Intelligence indicates that a high-value target has been spotted moving through this valley. We've got SEAL Team Charlie positioned on the ridge, but they're reporting some complications with their equipment." Sarah studied the map carefully, noting the terrain features and potential sight lines. The valley Rodriguez indicated was known to be a smuggling route used by insurgent forces to move weapons and personnel between safe houses. If there was indeed a high-value target in the area, it represented a significant opportunity to disrupt enemy operations. "What kind of complications are we talking about, Sergeant Major?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Equipment failures were becoming increasingly common as the harsh desert environment took its toll on even the most rugged military hardware. Their primary sniper rifle is having scope issues, and their backup shooter injured his shoulder during insertion last night, Rodriguez explained. "They need someone who can make a clean shot at extended range, and Command thinks you might be the person for the job." Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline mixed with apprehension. She had trained for situations like this, but most of her experience had been in controlled environments or relatively low-stakes scenarios. A mission involving Navy SEALs and a high-value target was exactly the kind of operation where failure could have serious consequences for everyone involved. "How long do I have to prepare?" she asked, already mentally running through her equipment checklist. "Transport leaves in 30 minutes. The SEALs have been in position since 0300 hours, and the target is expected to move through the kill zone sometime between 0800 and 1000 hours, Rodriguez replied. "This is strictly voluntary, Mitchell. No one would think less of you if you decided to pass on this one." Sarah looked at the map again, calculating distances and angles in her head. The shot would be challenging, but not impossible, assuming the intelligence was accurate and the weather conditions remained stable. More importantly, she knew that if she didn't take the assignment, there might not be another opportunity to neutralize the target for weeks or even months. "I'll do it," she said without hesitation. "Give me 15 minutes to gather my gear, and I'll be ready to go." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "I'll let SEAL Team Charlie know they're getting some backup. Good luck out there, Mitchell." Sarah spent the next few minutes carefully inspecting her rifle and ammunition, ensuring that everything was in perfect working order. Her weapon was a custom-built precision rifle that she had personally modified during her advanced marksmanship training. Every component had been selected and adjusted to match her shooting style and physical characteristics, creating a system that felt like a natural extension of her body. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was bumpy and loud, making it difficult to review the mission details or mentally prepare for what lay ahead. Sarah closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, using techniques she had learned from a meditation instructor who worked with military snipers. The ability to control her heart rate and remain calm under extreme stress was just as important as her marksmanship skills. When the helicopter touched down in a small clearing about 2 kilometers from the SEAL position, Sarah quickly gathered her equipment and moved toward the tree line where her contact was waiting. The landscape was rocky and unforgiving, with sparse vegetation that offered little concealment for anyone trying to move through the area undetected. Staff Sergeant Williams, the SEAL Team communications specialist, met her at the designated rally point and immediately began briefing her on the tactical situation. The target was a suspected bomb maker who had been responsible for several attacks on coalition forces in recent months. Intelligence suggested that he was traveling with a small security detail and would be moving through the valley sometime in the next 2 hours. The shooting position is about 800 meters from here, Williams explained as they moved carefully through the rocky terrain. Chief Petty Officer Johnson will be your spotter, and the rest of the team will provide security and communications support. Sarah nodded, focusing on the terrain ahead and trying to anticipate any challenges she might encounter when setting up her shooting position. The distance to the target area would require precise calculations for bullet drop and wind compensation, especially if the environmental conditions changed during the mission. As they approached the SEAL position, Sarah could see why the team had chosen this particular location. The ridge offered excellent visibility of the entire valley while providing natural concealment from anyone moving through the area below. The angle would be steep but manageable, and there were several good spots where she could establish a stable shooting platform. Chief Petty Officer Johnson greeted her with a professional handshake and immediately began pointing out key terrain features and potential complications. The wind has been shifting pretty regularly for the past hour, he said, handing her a pair of high-powered binoculars. We've been tracking it with this handheld weather station, but you'll need to make your own assessment when the time comes. Sarah spent several minutes studying the valley through the binoculars, identifying landmarks, and measuring distances to various points where the target might appear. The intelligence report indicated that the suspect would most likely follow a specific trail that ran along the valley floor, but there were several alternative routes he could take if he suspected surveillance. What's the backup plan if he doesn't show up in the expected location? Sarah asked, continuing to scan the area below. We wait, Johnson replied simply. Command wants this guy badly enough that they're willing to keep us here for up to 12 hours if necessary. Sarah nodded and began setting up her shooting position, carefully adjusting her rifle and checking the scope settings. The equipment that had failed the SEAL snipers was indeed having serious problems, with the scope mount loose enough to affect accuracy at long range. She was glad that she had brought her own weapon system instead of trying to use the compromised equipment. The waiting began in earnest as Sarah settled into her position and began the mental process of preparing for a potentially difficult shot. She reviewed everything she knew about ballistics and environmental factors, running through scenarios in her mind and preparing for various contingencies. The target might appear at any moment, and she needed to be ready to take the shot quickly and accurately when the opportunity presented itself. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sarah found herself thinking about the training that had brought her to this point. The countless hours on shooting ranges, the advanced courses in ballistics and weather compensation, and the psychological preparation for high-stress situations had all led to this moment. She had always known that her skills might someday be tested in a real-world scenario, but the reality of the situation was more intense than anything she had experienced during training. The radio crackled softly as updates came in from various observation points around the valley. So far, there had been no sign of the target or his security detail, but intelligence remained confident that he would appear sometime before noon. Sarah adjusted her position slightly and continued to monitor the area through her scope, watching for any movement that might indicate the approach of hostile forces. Johnson periodically updated her on wind conditions and other environmental factors that could affect her shot. The wind was indeed shifting regularly, varying in both speed and direction in ways that would require careful compensation. Sarah made mental notes of the patterns she was observing, trying to predict how conditions might change when she finally had to take the shot. Time seemed to move slowly as they waited for the target to appear. Sarah remained focused but relaxed, knowing that tension and anxiety would only make her job more difficult when the critical moment arrived. She had learned during her training that successful snipers needed to be able to maintain their concentration for extended periods while remaining ready to act instantly when required. The mission was about to become much more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The first indication that something was wrong came at 0847 hours when Johnson's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the observation post on the southern ridge. Control, this is Overwatch 2. We've got movement in Sector 7, but it's not matching the expected profile. Sarah adjusted her scope and scanned the area indicated by the spotter. Instead of the small security detail that intelligence had predicted, She could see at least 8 individuals moving through the valley in a tactical formation that suggested they were well-trained and heavily armed. The target was there, identifiable by the distinctive clothing described in the briefing, but the situation had become significantly more complex. "This doesn't look like a simple transport mission," Johnson muttered, studying the group through his own binoculars. "These guys are moving like they know exactly where they're going and what they're doing." Sarah continued to track the group as they moved along the valley floor, noting their spacing and movement patterns. The security detail was maintaining proper intervals and using available cover effectively, which indicated a level of training that would make them dangerous opponents if the mission went sideways. More concerning was the fact that they seemed to be heading directly toward a position where they would have good visibility of the ridge where the SEAL team was positioned. "Control, this is Overwatch 1. Sarah heard Johnson report over the radio. "Target is in sight with expanded security element. Count is 8 personnel, all armed, moving in tactical formation toward grid reference 742916. The response from command was immediate and tense. "Copy, Overwatch 1. Intelligence indicates possible counter-surveillance operation. Maintain position and wait for further instructions." Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly as the implications of the message became clear. If the enemy forces were conducting counter-surveillance, it meant they suspected that coalition forces were operating in the area and were actively looking for signs of surveillance or sniper positions. The mission had just evolved from a relatively straightforward assassination to a potential firefight where the SEAL team could find themselves outnumbered and in a defensive position. "How's your shot looking?" Johnson asked quietly, keeping his voice low even though they were well beyond the range where normal conversation could be detected by anyone in the valley. Sarah studied the target through her scope, calculating the range and environmental factors she would need to consider. The distance was approximately 847 meters, which was well within her capabilities under normal circumstances. However, the target was moving at a steady pace and would only be in the optimal shooting position for a few seconds as he passed through a small clearing where there were no obstructions. "I can make the shot, but the window is going to be very small," she replied. "Maybe 3 to 4 seconds of clear sight picture, and that's assuming he doesn't change course or take cover." The target group continued to advance through the valley, their movement becoming more cautious as they approached areas that could potentially conceal hostile forces. Sarah could see that the lead elements were scanning the surrounding ridges with binoculars, clearly looking for any signs of surveillance or sniper positions. "Control, this is Overwatch 1, Johnson transmitted again. Target group is displaying counter-surveillance behavior. Recommend immediate engagement authorization before they reach the dead space." The dead space Johnson referred to was an area of the valley where rocky outcroppings and vegetation would provide excellent concealment for the target group, while making it virtually impossible for Sarah to maintain visual contact or engage effectively. If the target reached that area, the mission would likely be over unless the SEAL team was willing to compromise their position by moving to a different location. Sarah kept her crosshairs centered on the target as he moved through the valley, waiting for the engagement authorization while mentally preparing for the shot. She had already calculated the ballistic data she would need and made preliminary adjustments to her scope settings. The wind was steady at approximately 8 miles per hour from the northwest, which would require a minor compensation to ensure accuracy at the extended range. "All Overwatch elements, this is Control. You are authorized to engage the primary target. Repeat, you are authorized to engage primary target only. Minimize collateral damage and prepare for immediate extraction after engagement." Sarah felt the familiar calm that always came over her in the moments before taking a critical shot. Her breathing slowed, and her heart rate stabilized as she entered the mental zone that she had trained herself to achieve under high-stress conditions. Everything around her seemed to become quiet and focused, with her entire attention concentrated on the target and the specific adjustments she would need to make to ensure a clean hit. The target was approaching the optimal engagement area, moving at a steady pace that would bring him into the small clearing where Sarah would have her best opportunity for a clean shot. She tracked his movement carefully, leading him slightly to account for his forward motion and the time it would take for the bullet to travel the distance between her position and the target area. "Range 847 meters, wind northwest at 8 miles per hour, Johnson called quietly, providing confirmation of the environmental data Sarah had calculated independently. "Target will be in the engagement zone in approximately 30 seconds. Sarah made final adjustments to her scope and settled into her shooting position, controlling her breathing and waiting for the perfect moment to take the shot. The target was moving steadily toward the clearing, apparently unaware that he was about to enter the kill zone that had been established by the SEAL team. 20 seconds. The target group was maintaining their tactical formation, but their attention seemed to be focused primarily on the ridges to the south, where they might expect sniper positions to be located. Sarah's position on the northern ridge had apparently not been detected, giving her the element of surprise that would be crucial for mission success. 15 seconds. Sarah could see the target clearly through her scope, and she began the final phase of her shooting preparation. Her breathing became slower and more controlled, and she started applying gradual pressure to the trigger in preparation for the shot that would need to be taken in just a few moments. 10 seconds. The target entered the edge of the clearing, moving at a pace that would bring him into the optimal shooting position very quickly. Sarah tracked his movement smoothly, keeping her crosshairs centered on his center of mass, while continuing to account for his forward motion and the environmental factors that would affect the bullet's trajectory. 5 seconds. The target was almost in the perfect position. Just a few more steps, and he would be completely clear of any obstructions that could deflect or stop the bullet. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger as she prepared to take the shot that would complete the mission and eliminate a significant threat to coalition forces in the region. Then, everything went wrong at once. Just as the target stepped into the optimal shooting position, one of his security personnel suddenly raised his hand and pointed directly toward Sarah's position. The entire group immediately scattered, diving for whatever cover they could find, while the target himself sprinted toward the rocky outcropping that would provide him with complete protection from any sniper fire. "They've made us," Johnson hissed into his radio. "Target is moving to cover. All units prepare for immediate extraction." Sarah had perhaps 2 seconds to make a decision that would affect the entire mission. The target was moving fast toward cover, but he was still within range, and she still had a partially clear shot. It would be much more difficult than the shot she had been preparing for, requiring her to engage a moving target at extended range while under the stress of knowing that the enemy forces were now aware of her position. Without hesitation, Sarah made the adjustments necessary for the new shooting scenario. She led the target more aggressively to account for his increased speed, made a quick compensation for the slight change in angle, and squeezed the trigger in one smooth motion just as the target dove toward the rocky cover that would have made further engagement impossible. The shot rang out across the valley, echoing off the rocky walls and announcing to everyone in the area that the engagement had begun. Sarah immediately began cycling her bolt to chamber another round while Johnson called out the impact assessment through his binoculars. "Miss, target is in cover, and the security element is laying down suppressive fire on our position." The distinct crack of incoming rifle rounds began snapping overhead as the enemy security team opened fire on the ridge where they had detected the muzzle flash from Sarah's shot. The SEAL team immediately began returning fire while preparing for the emergency extraction that had become necessary now that their position was compromised. Sarah felt a crushing sense of disappointment as she realized that she had failed to hit the target despite having what should have been a manageable shot. The combination of the moving target, the time pressure, and the stress of the tactical situation had caused her to miss a shot that would normally be well within her capabilities. "We need to move now," Johnson shouted over the increasing volume of gunfire. "They're going to flank us if we stay here much longer." The mission that had started as a routine sniper engagement was rapidly turning into a running firefight that would test every aspect of the SEAL team's training and Sarah's ability to perform under the most challenging possible circumstances. The situation deteriorated rapidly as enemy fire intensified from multiple positions throughout the valley. Sarah could hear bullets snapping overhead and impacting the rocks around their position as the hostile security team attempted to suppress the SEAL team while maneuvering to more advantageous positions. The careful planning and preparation that had gone into the mission was now meaningless as the engagement became a desperate fight for survival. "Control, this is Overwatch 1. Johnson shouted into his radio while returning fire with his carbine. "We are taking effective fire from multiple positions and need immediate extraction support." Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared to move, knowing that staying in their current position would eventually result in the team being overrun by superior numbers. The enemy forces had reacted quickly and professionally to the sniper attack, dispersing to covered positions and establishing interlocking fields of fire that would make movement extremely dangerous for anyone on the ridge. Extract bird is 15 minutes out, came the response from command. Can you hold your position until then? Johnson looked around at the tactical situation and quickly assessed their options. The SEAL team consisted of 5 personnel plus Sarah, and they were facing at least 8 enemy fighters who knew the terrain and had the advantage of choosing their positions after the initial engagement. 15 minutes was a very long time to hold a defensive position against a determined enemy with superior numbers. Negative on holding current position, Johnson replied. We're going to bound back to alternate position, Charlie, and try to break contact. Sarah had trained with various military units during her career, but she had never experienced the intensity of combat with Navy SEALs under fire. The team moved with practiced precision despite the chaos around them, with each member covering specific sectors while they displaced to a more defensible position further back along the ridge. Mitchell, you're with Williams, Staff Sergeant Peterson called out as the team prepared to move. Keep your rifle ready in case we get a shot opportunity during the displacement. Sarah slung her rifle across her back and prepared to follow Williams as the team began their tactical withdrawal from the compromised position. The enemy fire was becoming more accurate as the hostile forces adjusted their aim points and began coordinating their efforts to pin down the American forces. The movement to the alternate position required the team to cross approximately 200 meters of exposed terrain while under fire from multiple directions. Sarah found herself running in short sprints between whatever cover was available, her heart pounding as she tried to keep up with Williams while maintaining her grip on her heavy rifle and associated equipment. A bullet struck the rock just inches from Sarah's head as she dove behind a boulder, sending stone fragments flying and reminding her just how close to death she was at every moment. The enemy shooters were good, much better than the intelligence reports had suggested, and they were rapidly adjusting their fire to account for the team's movement patterns. Overwatch 1. This is Overwatch 3. Came a transmission from another SEAL team member who had moved to a flanking position. I've got eyes on 2 shooters in the rocks about 400 meters southeast of your position. Can you engage from your current location? Sarah looked toward the area indicated and could indeed see muzzle flashes from enemy weapons firing toward their previous position. The range was manageable, but engaging would require her to expose herself to return fire from multiple directions while trying to make precision shots under extremely stressful conditions. I can try, Sarah responded, but I'll need covering fire while I set up. The SEAL team immediately began laying down suppressive fire on the enemy positions while Sarah established a shooting platform behind a large rock that provided some protection from enemy fire. She could hear bullets striking the stone around her as she tried to set up her rifle and acquire targets through her scope. The first enemy shooter came into her sight picture just as a bullet struck the rock near her scope, sending more stone fragments flying and momentarily disrupting her vision. Sarah blinked hard to clear her eyes and reacquired the target, but by then, he had moved to a different position and was no longer visible. Targets displaced, Sarah called out. I lost him when they returned fire. The engagement continued as both sides maneuvered for better positions while maintaining a steady volume of fire. Sarah realized that the enemy forces were trying to flank the SEAL team's position by moving through the rocky terrain to the north, which would eventually allow them to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Johnson, they're trying to get around our left flank, Sarah called out after spotting movement in the rocks about 300 meters away. I can see at least 2 individuals moving through the draw to our north. Johnson cursed under his breath as he assessed the developing tactical situation. If the enemy succeeded in flanking their position, the SEAL team would be caught in a crossfire that would make their situation hopeless. They needed to either eliminate the flanking force or complete their withdrawal to a more defensible position before the enemy could establish their new firing positions. Williams, take Morrison and intercept that flanking movement, Johnson ordered. The rest of us will continue the withdrawal to position Charlie. Sarah watched as 2 of the SEAL team members moved quickly through the rocky terrain to counter the enemy flanking attempt. Their movement was smooth and professional, but she could see that they would be severely outnumbered if they made contact with the hostile forces moving through the northern draw. Control, this is Overwatch 1, Johnson transmitted again. We are engaged with superior numbers and need immediate air support if available. Overwatch 1, this is Control. Air support is not available at this time. Extract bird is now 12 minutes out. Can you break contact and move to the primary extraction point? Sarah looked toward the extraction point that had been designated during the mission briefing. It was approximately 800 meters from their current position, across terrain that offered very little cover and would leave them exposed to enemy fire for most of the movement. Reaching the extraction point would require them to either defeat the enemy forces or find a way to break contact without being pursued. The sound of gunfire from the north indicated that Williams and Morrison had made contact with the enemy flanking force. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of American weapons mixed with the sharper crack of the AK-47 rifles favored by insurgent forces in the region. The engagement seemed to be intense, but brief, suggesting that the SEAL team members had either eliminated the threat or forced the enemy to withdraw. Overwatch 1. This is Williams, came the transmission a few moments later. Flanking force has been neutralized, but we've got more movement to the east. Looks like they're bringing up reinforcements. Johnson processed this information quickly and made the decision that would determine whether the team survived the engagement. All Overwatch elements. We're going to bound back to the extraction point in two-man teams. Williams and Morrison will provide Overwatch while Mitchell and I move first. Then Peterson and Rodriguez will follow. Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared for what would likely be the most dangerous few minutes of her life. The movement to the extraction point would require her to cross open terrain while carrying a heavy rifle and being pursued by enemy forces who were now fully aware of their location and intentions. Ready? Johnson asked, checking his weapon and preparing to move. Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she would ever truly be ready for what they were about to attempt. The first 50 meters passed without incident as Sarah and Johnson sprinted across the rocky terrain toward a depression that would provide temporary cover. Sarah could hear Williams and Morrison laying down covering fire behind them, but she could also hear the enemy weapons responding with increasing intensity. A bullet struck the ground just in front of Sarah's feet, causing her to stumble slightly, but not fall. She recovered her balance and continued running, focusing on reaching the next piece of cover while trying not to think about how exposed they were to enemy fire from multiple directions. They reached the depression and immediately took up firing positions to provide covering fire for Peterson and Rodriguez, who were preparing to make their own dash toward the extraction point. Sarah could see enemy muzzle flashes from at least 5 different positions, indicating that the hostile forces had spread out to maximize their effectiveness against the withdrawing American team. Go, 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 Johnson shouted, and Peterson and Rodriguez began their sprint across the open ground. Sarah aimed carefully at one of the enemy firing positions and squeezed off a shot, seeing the muzzle flash disappear immediately afterward. Whether she had hit the target or simply forced him to take cover, the result was the same, as that position stopped firing for several precious seconds. Peterson and Rodriguez reached their positions safely, and the team prepared for the final bound that would take them to the extraction point. Sarah could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching, indicating that their transportation out of the danger zone was getting closer, but was still several minutes away. The last movement would be the most dangerous, as they would be crossing the most exposed terrain while the enemy forces had time to adjust their positions and concentrate their fire. Sarah checked her ammunition and prepared for what might be her final engagement of the mission. The final movement to the extraction point required the team to cross a valley that offered virtually no cover for nearly 400 meters. Sarah could see the designated landing zone ahead, marked by an infrared strobe that was visible only through night vision equipment despite the daylight conditions. The helicopter was now clearly audible but still several minutes away, and the enemy forces had repositioned themselves to take advantage of the team's predictable movement toward the extraction point. Control, this is Overwatch 1, Johnson transmitted while scanning the area ahead with his binoculars. We can see the extraction point, but the approach is completely exposed. Enemy forces are positioned to interdict our movement with effective fire. Overwatch 1, Extract Bird is 5 minutes out. You need to be in position when he arrives, or we won't be able to get you out of there. Sarah studied the tactical situation and realized that a conventional approach to the extraction point would likely result in casualties or mission failure. The enemy had too much time to establish good firing positions, and they clearly understood where the American forces needed to go. A direct approach would be walking into a carefully prepared kill zone. Johnson, Sarah said quietly, what if we don't go directly to the extraction point? Johnson looked at her questioningly, obviously wondering what alternative she had in mind given the limited terrain options available to them. The ridge that runs parallel to the valley continues for about 600 meters past the extraction point, Sarah continued. If I can get to a position up there, I might be able to provide overwatch for the team's movement while engaging the enemy positions that are covering the approach. Johnson considered this proposal while continuing to monitor the enemy positions through his binoculars. Sarah's plan would separate her from the team and put her in an extremely dangerous position where she would be essentially on her own against multiple enemy fighters. However, it might also provide the team with their best chance of reaching the extraction point safely. That's a hell of a risk, Mitchell, Johnson said finally. If something goes wrong, we won't be able to come back for you. Sarah had already considered this possibility and accepted the potential consequences of her proposal. The mission is to get everyone out alive. This gives us the best chance of making that happen. Williams and Morrison had rejoined the team after successfully dealing with the enemy flanking attempt, and Johnson quickly briefed them on Sarah's proposal. The discussion was brief but intense, with the SEAL team members weighing the tactical advantages against the risk to Sarah's life. How long would you need to get into position? Peterson asked, studying the ridge line that Sarah had indicated. Maybe 10 minutes to reach a good shooting position, plus a couple more minutes to range the targets and prepare for engagement, Sarah replied. The helicopter should be here by then, and you could time your movement to coincide with my engagement of the enemy positions. Rodriguez checked his watch and calculated the timing involved in Sarah's plan. That's cutting it pretty close. If the bird has to abort due to enemy fire, we might not get another extraction opportunity today. Johnson made the decision that would determine how the mission concluded. We'll do it. Mitchell, you've got 8 minutes to get into position and prepare for engagement. We'll start our movement when you engage the first target. Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared to separate from the team for what might be the final time. The ridge she needed to reach was accessible through a route that would keep her concealed from most of the enemy positions. But the final approach would require her to cross some exposed terrain where she could be detected and engaged. Good luck out there, Williams said as Sarah prepared to leave. Make those shots count. Sarah nodded and began moving toward the ridge, staying low and using whatever cover was available to conceal her movement from the enemy forces positioned throughout the valley. The weight of her rifle and equipment made the climb more difficult than she had anticipated, but she maintained a steady pace while constantly scanning for signs that she had been detected. The route to the ridge took her through rocky terrain that was both challenging to navigate and provided excellent concealment from observation. Sarah could hear the ongoing exchange of gunfire between the SEAL team and enemy forces, indicating that both sides were maintaining contact while maneuvering for better positions. As she climbed higher up the ridge, Sarah began to get a better view of the entire tactical situation spread out below her. She could now see at least 6 enemy positions that were covering the approach to the extraction point, with the fighters arranged to provide overlapping fields of fire that would make movement across the valley extremely dangerous. The sound of helicopter rotors was becoming louder, indicating that the extraction aircraft was approaching the area and would soon be visible to everyone involved in the engagement. Sarah knew that the enemy forces would likely increase their rate of fire once the helicopter appeared, making her mission even more critical to the team's survival. Sarah reached a position on the ridge that provided her with good visibility of most of the enemy positions while offering some protection from return fire. She quickly established a shooting platform and began ranging targets, starting with the positions that posed the greatest threat to the team's movement toward the extraction point. The first target was approximately 650 meters away, positioned behind a cluster of rocks that provided him with excellent cover while giving him a clear field of fire across the valley floor. Sarah calculated the ballistic data she would need and made preliminary adjustments to her scope, preparing for what would need to be a perfect shot under extremely challenging conditions. Overwatch 1, this is Mitchell, she transmitted quietly. I'm in position and have identified 6 enemy positions covering the extraction point. Beginning engagement in 30 seconds. Copy, Mitchell. We'll begin movement on your first shot. Sarah controlled her breathing and settled into her shooting position, focusing all of her attention on the first target while mentally preparing for the rapid engagement of multiple targets that would follow. She would need to move quickly between positions after each shot to avoid being located and engaged by return fire. The crosshairs settled on the first target, and Sarah began applying pressure to the trigger while making final adjustments for wind and range. Everything around her seemed to become quiet and focused as she entered the mental state that allowed her to perform at her highest level under extreme stress. The shot broke cleanly, and Sarah immediately saw the target fall before she began moving to a different position for her second engagement. She could hear Johnson's voice over the radio confirming that the SEAL team had begun their movement toward the extraction point, and she could see muzzle flashes from the remaining enemy positions as they began returning fire. Sarah's second target was positioned about 550 meters away in a location that offered him good coverage of the team's likely route across the valley. She quickly established a new shooting position and acquired the target through her scope, noting that he was already beginning to search for her location after hearing her first shot. The second shot was more challenging because the target was partially concealed and moving, but Sarah managed to connect just as he was preparing to engage the SEAL team, crossing the open ground below. Another enemy position had been eliminated, but Sarah could see that the remaining fighters were beginning to concentrate their fire on her position. Bullets began striking the rocks around Sarah as the enemy forces attempted to locate and engage her sniper position. She moved quickly to yet another location along the ridge while chambering another round and preparing for her third engagement. Time was running out as the helicopter approached the extraction point, and the SEAL team continued their dangerous movement across the exposed valley floor. The third target proved to be the most challenging yet, as he had taken cover in a position that offered only a very small target profile, while still allowing him to maintain effective fire on the extraction point. Sarah had to wait for him to expose himself sufficiently for a clean shot, all while enemy fire continued to search for her position along the ridge. When the opportunity finally presented itself, Sarah took the shot without hesitation and saw the target drop immediately. 3 enemy positions had been eliminated, but she could see that at least 2 more were still maintaining fire on the team's movement route. The helicopter was now clearly visible approaching the extraction point, and the enemy forces were intensifying their efforts to prevent the American team from reaching safety. Sarah began moving toward her fourth target when she felt a sharp impact against the rock next to her head, followed immediately by the crack of a rifle shot from somewhere in the valley below. The enemy forces had finally located her position and were beginning to concentrate their fire on the ridge where she was operating. Despite the increasing danger to her own safety, Sarah continued her mission to eliminate the remaining enemy positions that threatened the SEAL team's extraction. She could see Johnson and the others moving rapidly across the valley floor, getting closer to the extraction point with each passing second. The helicopter was beginning its approach to the landing zone, and everything would depend on whether Sarah could neutralize the remaining threats in time. The fourth target fell to her next shot, leaving only one enemy position that was still maintaining effective fire on the extraction point. Sarah could see the SEAL team members diving for cover as bullets struck the ground around them, and she knew that this final engagement would determine whether everyone made it home safely. The final enemy position was the most challenging target Sarah had faced during the entire engagement. The fighter had positioned himself in a location that offered excellent concealment while maintaining a perfect field of fire on the helicopter landing zone. From his position, he could effectively prevent the extraction helicopter from landing safely, which would doom the entire mission and potentially result in the loss of the aircraft and crew as well as the SEAL team. Sarah could hear the helicopter pilot's voice over the radio as he assessed the landing zone and reported taking fire from the enemy position. Overwatch 1, this is Extract Bird. I'm taking effective fire from a position about 200 meters northeast of the landing zone. I cannot put down until that threat is eliminated. Johnson's voice came back immediately, tense with the urgency of their situation. Mitchell, do you have eyes on that position? We need that target eliminated now. Sarah scanned the area indicated by the pilot and, finally, located the enemy fighter positioned among rocks that provided him with almost perfect concealment. Only a small portion of his body was visible, and he was moving constantly to make himself an even more difficult target. The range was approximately 680 meters, and the angle was steep enough to complicate her ballistic calculations. I see him, Sarah transmitted back. Stand by for engagement. The pressure of the situation was immense as Sarah prepared for what might be the most important shot of her entire career. The lives of 6 American service members depended on her ability to neutralize this final threat under conditions that were far from ideal. Enemy fire was still searching for her position along the ridge, and she knew that her muzzle flash would immediately reveal her location to anyone who was watching for it. Sarah forced herself to focus entirely on the target and the specific adjustments she would need to make for a successful engagement. The wind had shifted slightly since her previous shots, and the steep angle required her to adjust her point of aim to account for the gravitational effects on the bullet's trajectory over the extended range. Through her scope, Sarah could see that the target was using his rifle to engage the helicopter as it attempted to approach the landing zone. Each shot he fired gave her a better idea of his exact position, but it also meant that he was actively trying to shoot down the aircraft that represented the team's only chance of escape. "Extract bird. This is Overwatch 1. Johnson's voice came over the radio. "Begin your approach. The sniper will engage the threat as you come in." Sarah heard the helicopter's engines change pitch as the pilot began his final approach to the landing zone. This was the moment when everything had to work perfectly, with no room for error or hesitation. The target would be concentrating on the approaching aircraft, which might give Sarah the opportunity she needed for a clean shot. The enemy fighter raised his rifle to engage the helicopter just as Sarah's crosshairs settled on the small portion of his torso that was visible above the rocks. She could see him preparing to fire at the aircraft, and she knew that this might be her only opportunity to stop him before he could shoot down the helicopter. Sarah's breathing slowed to almost nothing as she applied steady pressure to her trigger. Everything around her seemed to fade away except for the target in her scope, and the precise adjustments she was making to ensure the shot would connect exactly where she intended. The sound of gunfire, helicopter rotors, and radio transmissions all became background noise as she focused entirely on the shot that would determine the mission's outcome. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder as the shot broke cleanly, and Sarah immediately observed the impact through her scope. The bullet struck the target exactly where she had aimed, and she saw him collapse behind the rocks that had provided him with concealment. The threat to the helicopter had been eliminated just as the aircraft was beginning its final approach to the landing zone. "Target down," Sarah called out over the radio. "The position is clear for landing." The helicopter touched down in the designated landing zone as Johnson and the rest of the SEAL team completed their sprint across the remaining open ground. Sarah could see them running toward the aircraft while maintaining security around the landing site, their discipline and training evident even in the final moments of a chaotic and dangerous mission. "Mitchell, get to the landing zone now." Johnson's voice came over the radio. "We're not leaving without you." Sarah gathered her equipment and began moving quickly down from the ridge toward the landing zone where the helicopter was waiting with its rotors spinning. The route down was treacherous, with loose rocks and steep terrain that threatened to cause her to fall and injure herself just when safety was within reach. Behind her, Sarah could hear scattered gunfire as the surviving enemy forces attempted to reorganize and continue the engagement, but their most effective firing positions had been eliminated and they were no longer able to effectively threaten the extraction operation. The mission had been successful despite the initial failure and the unexpected complications that had nearly resulted in disaster. As Sarah reached the valley floor and began running toward the helicopter, she could see Johnson and the other SEAL team members providing security around the landing zone while urging her to move faster. The pilot was keeping the aircraft on the ground despite the ongoing enemy fire, demonstrating the courage and professionalism that characterized military aviation operations. Sarah reached the helicopter and was pulled aboard by Williams just as the pilot began lifting off from the landing zone. Through the aircraft's open door, she could see the terrain where the engagement had taken place, now seeming almost peaceful despite the violence that had occurred there just minutes earlier. "Outstanding shooting, Mitchell," Johnson said over the aircraft's intercom system as they gained altitude and headed toward the safety of the forward operating base. "You saved all our lives out there." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion as the adrenaline began to fade from her system. The mission had been far more challenging than anyone had anticipated, with multiple equipment failures, intelligence discrepancies, and tactical complications that had turned a routine sniper engagement into a running firefight for survival. "What about the original target?" Sarah asked, suddenly, remembering that the high-value individual they had been sent to eliminate had escaped during the initial engagement. "Intelligence is analyzing the engagement now," Peterson replied. "Based on the blood trail and other evidence at the scene, they think you might have wounded him during your first shot, even though we couldn't confirm it at the time." Sarah thought back to that critical moment when she had been forced to engage a moving target under extreme time pressure. She had been convinced that the shot was a complete miss, but it was possible that the bullet had found its mark despite the challenging conditions. If the target had indeed been wounded, it would significantly limit his ability to continue his bomb-making activities even if he had managed to escape immediate capture. The helicopter flight back to the base gave Sarah time to reflect on everything that had happened during the mission. She had experienced the full spectrum of combat operations, from the careful planning and preparation of a sniper engagement to the chaos and confusion of a firefight against superior numbers. Most importantly, she had learned that her training and natural abilities could be relied upon even under the most extreme circumstances. Control, this is Extract Bird, the pilot transmitted as they approached the landing zone at the forward operating base. Package is secure and returning to base. Mission accomplished. As the helicopter touched down and Sarah stepped onto the familiar ground of the base where her day had started, she realized that she had been fundamentally changed by her experience. The young soldier who had volunteered for the mission that morning was gone, replaced by someone who had proven herself under fire and earned the respect of some of the military's most elite operators. The debriefing that followed would reveal that Sarah's performance during the mission had been exceptional by any standard. Not only had she successfully eliminated 5 enemy combatants who were threatening the SEAL team's extraction, but subsequent intelligence analysis confirmed that her first shot had indeed wounded the primary target seriously enough to remove him from operational status for several months. More importantly, Sarah had demonstrated the kind of courage and skill under fire that marked her as someone who could be trusted with the most challenging and critical missions. Her willingness to risk her own life to ensure the safety of the SEAL team had not gone unnoticed by the special operations community, and it would lead to opportunities for advanced training and assignments that few soldiers ever received. Within weeks of the mission, Sarah received orders transferring her to a specialized sniper unit, where her skills could be developed further and utilized in operations that required the highest levels of precision and reliability. The young woman from Montana who had learned to shoot on her family's ranch had become one of the military's most valuable precision marksmen, capable of making the shots that others couldn't when lives depended on it. The mission in the desert valley had been just the beginning of a career that would take Sarah to some of the world's most dangerous locations, where her rifle and her steady nerves would save countless lives and complete missions that seemed impossible to others. But she would always remember this day as the moment when she discovered what she was truly capable of accomplishing when everything was on the line.